Hey, how's it going? Tim Warner here. Today I want to talk about separation of duties or separation of concerns, particularly with software development. I've been happily listening to YouTube recordings of interviews with classic game developers. In fact, it's not the Classic Game Conference, the GDC, the Game Developers Conference channel has an archive of postmortems where classic game designers from the 80s and 90s talk about their design process, the development process, the release process, what went wrong, what went right. And one of these interviews was with a guy named Brad Taylor, who was a developer with LucasArts back in the late 90s, was it? Early 2000s, when the point-and-click text adventures with graphics started becoming a big deal. Like LucasArts made Maniac Mansion, Day of the Tentacle, Full Throttle, Grim Fandango. And this guy, Brad, he was cracking me up. But one particular part of his interview really got me, where he was a software dev, so he's concerned with the game engine, with the installer, with the performance. And then there was a team of writers. These are creative folks who largely aren't even technical. And they're literally just crafting these adventure yarns that'll eventually be turned into a game. In fact, what Brad helped make was what's called the Scum engine. And among other things, it was a scripting interface to where the authors of these adventure stories didn't have to know programming. They could just, describe what they wanted to do, basically, and artists would create the art. And the scripting engine would wire the different rooms together and the actions that the player could take. Anyway, Brad was saying that during crunch time, he was sitting next to working next to one of the authors, and each of them was just in their own agony because the writer was just stressing to the gills about, how am I going to resolve these plot threads? What about this character's arc and all of this story stuff? And at the same time, Brad's sitting next to him and he's fretting and freaking, thinking, will the whole software fit on a single floppy disk? Will the software draw the screen fast enough for the user? And I just get such a kick out of that. Because in my career, I've been primarily on the content development side, but I've worked alongside developers my entire career, so I can relate to both sides of that equation. And it just makes me think along my history as a practitioner and how IT trends have moved, that towards the beginning of my career when I was at Transcender, I was on the content development side. I helped fill in the software. It was the actual IT certification practice exams. But just as important as the content that I wrote was the underlying engine that the developers were responsible for. And although this was before the days of, the formal official days of DevOps and that sort of thing, we, content developers, would regularly meet informally with software developers, particularly when an IT certification vendor would release a new interactive item type. We had to present that to the devs, explain how it works in the live engine, and then their task would be to replicate it in the Transcender practice exam engine. And again, thinking back, this was late 90s, early 2000s. We were so unsophisticated, we didn't have issue or bug tracking databases. It was just you walk to their office and you talk to them and you walk back to your office. And if they have a question, they'll send you an email or walk down to your office, you see. And now with DevOps being a much more formal methodology, I would envision that a similar situation would be where the content developers, that is, in this case of LucasArts, their adventure games, the authors, would be in the same tool set as the developers and build and release engineers. And because they're practicing a software development project methodology like Agile or Scrum, they're aware of each other's concerns because they have a stand-up meeting every morning, every workday. It's amazing how times have changed. I think that The DevOps in particular is a really great evolution. And it's perfectly timed in the 21st century, given how fast and agile IT is nowadays. And so therefore it's far easier for important stuff to slip through the cracks. And that's how I like to describe DevOps and processes like Scrum and Agile. It's just a methodology to make sure that we're not repeating ourselves unnecessarily, that we're not letting what could be important issues slip through the cracks, keeping all of the team members responsible to their duties and accountable to their duties. It's really a brilliant way to go. And I'm grateful in particular to have had that time as a Microsoft full-time employee, because as a member of a few teams, I was able to be involved in a few different Scrum teams and see how each team can make the processes their own. At Microsoft, just about all the tool sets centered around, as you'd probably expect if you're a Microsoft specialist, the Azure DevOps family. That's what Microsoft uses internally, mostly, with a side of GitHub thrown in. And they're pretty good about adopting Scrum and DevOps practices. Again, I guess you have to be when you're distributed as much as a company like Microsoft is. Yikes. I mean, for instance, in their cloud computing division, the Microsoft Azure division, you've got your product teams that are working on just their little subset of Microsoft Azure. And they're working on that software, but they have to be in touch with so many other groups throughout the whole process. I was in one of those groups as an author. I worked at Microsoft Learn, so I was responsible for taking their roadmap and converting it into customer-facing documentation, explaining, writing tutorials for their generally available stuff, and the formalization of DevOps and processes like Agile and Scrum really made a big difference as far as getting people on the same page. And even still, it's a wonder when I think about how much consistency Microsoft is able to offer, given they have so many people spread all over the world. I know that people, including myself, sometimes harsh on Microsoft when inconsistencies and inscrutabilities show up, or like, what were they thinking? And then now that I've peeked behind the curtain, I've actually spent quite a bit of time behind the curtain, as a matter of fact. It's a wonder that they're able to deliver anything. Again, with the world being flat, thanks to the internet, you've got product teams that aren't all in the same physical office. You've got product teams that are distributed among cities, provinces, countries all around the entire globe. And yet they're working together to a common vision every workday. It's amazing, especially when you've got time zone differences from the US to East Europe and Australia, literally the other side of the globe. It's amazing. I had one colleague that I turned to for help, a brilliant guy, and he was in New Zealand. So, I mean, we were literally on opposite sides of the planet. So arranging for time, luckily he was a night owl. So during my work day, I could communicate with him because he was up all night anyway. So that was just a happy accident. I'd encourage you, if you're interested to know more about software development, or if you're a classic gamer like me, do some searches for some classic game programmer interviews. I particularly like the ones with the Atari 2600 developers, the Atari people, and then Activision and Imagic. All of those guys are particularly good interviewers, or good interviewees, I should say. And they're really clear about describing their motivations, and they all tend to have a really good sense of humor. I wish I was at Atari back in those days. It looked like a pretty fun environment. And even there, you've got the variety of human experience. If I understand the stories correctly, you had a group of hardcore partiers who were smoking weed all the time, and then another group of really straight-laced guys who were equally creative, equally brilliant at programming, but they were just there to make games and to do business. And you've got these different parties, again, all aligned to the same goals, but they're going about it in different ways. I really like that. It's been great. So I hope you found this lesson informative, even if you're not an IT professional. And I just had this idea yesterday. I was listening to these videos and I thought, This particular Brad Taylor interview really lights my fire. I think I'll tell my friends about it on my YouTube channel. So here we go. Thanks a lot. I'll see you again. Bye.